Welcome to the Veritas podcast, where we explore heterodox thoughts on politics, sex and culture with an exciting lineup of international guests. I am your host, Dr. Petra Buskins, and I'll be asking guests, what is it that distinguishes this political and cultural moment? Why isn't the world making sense anymore? What is reality in an algorithmically driven world? How can we regenerate our psyches and societies?
Andrew, fantastic to see you.
Great to see you. Yeah.
I thought I'd start with a little discussion about how we met, because it seems relevant as a bit of a backstory to why you're on pod and your academic interests and mine, and then the fact that we exist outside of academia as well. So it all seems relevant. So I thought, that I actually can't remember the details of how we met digitally, because we haven't yet met in person. It feels but we haven't.
One of these strange relationships,
Yes, and yet so common. So I wrote that piece, an apology to J.K. Rowling. I don't think we had yet even digitally met, and had that whole debacle with the Australian Sociological Association congratulating me and then withdrawing congratulations when it was revealed I was a TERF. And I remember we must have already known each other, because you said, I remember I was out at a waterhole with the kids playing, and my friend and the kids, I think my son was about 8 at the time, and it was over summer, and you said, you might want to have a look on Twitter. I still had a Twitter account. It's really roaring. You're being called a transphobe, and, various colleagues at Melbourne Uni are saying this and that. And I just remember thinking what an ethical person you were, and a colleague worth his salt. You instantly backed me and didn't know me that well. And I don't know if I've ever told you that half a dozen of my colleagues who were actually friends didn't. Yeah. And that hurt. And you just sort of stood by me, and we had this whole kind of backstory, back channel discussion. And, there was the other guy, Nick.
Nick Osbaldiston.
Yeah, that's right. He sort of joined it. But I just felt a real camaraderie, and I feel really grateful that you stood by me at that time. That I know you were doing that on principle in terms of viewpoint diversity, but I felt it personally when there was that sort of Twitter mob opposition, and then, actual people I worked with at Melbourne Uni, and I didn't get my honorary renewed in theology. So a lot of people don't know that, because my email stayed the same, but I kind of went to philosophy, where I was taken on literally, quote unquote, as an academic refugee. So there was that whole piece, and the petition that you did that was fantastic and signed by all kinds of people.
That open letter.
Yeah, the open letter, and signed, and that was very supportive. I don't think it's online anymore. And neither is the article, because I think it's going to be part of a publication that maybe Quillette are doing. I did actually speak to Iona about that.
Right, okay. You're the J.K. Rowling one?
Yeah.
It was originally an area, right? And it was at the top of the most popular article for that year or the month or whatever it was.
That's right.
I think
the year, actually. I know. It was above Stephen Pinker. That was my It's been downhill ever since. Aereo closed, and I believe Quillette has bought the rights.
Yeah. Well, Iona was working with the editor at Aereo, took over it after Helen, and then now Iona's at Quillette, and I think she just wants to preserve as much, because there's so much gold in there, right? Not just your article. And so I think they're trying to preserve it like in one way or another, and I assume they're trying to kind of extract some of that gold and potentially put it out there again, because it totally makes sense too. You don't want that stuff to just be sitting idle where no one is actually seeing it. And of course, it's so relevant to now as well, right?
Ongoing. But, it's interesting, because we've talked about that before in relation to Quillette and maybe Aereo, but that was a specific moment, that sort of 2017 to 2020, when I think there was a real energy behind it that it had to break through the sound shell. It's broken through now. And in fact, now is a lot of its own, some of which I like, some of which I don't like, some aspects of the populism and the move to the right. But it was, I think, a really, really pivotal historical moment too. So I now see that not simply as an ongoing shift to heterodox thinking, or it is, but it was a foundation stone in some key way. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. But yeah.
It was totally a critical point. And I guess it had sort of been building a little bit, and I see it as this convergence of, that there had been that like ideological kind of groupthink within academia and these orthodoxies developing over time. There is that data that sort of showed that the academy was always left leaning, right? But then it had sort of going even more and more and more so that such that the ratio of like a left to right academic in the US had gone from like 9-1 or something in the late 90s or 2000 to like 99-1 in some departments, right? And you're actually, you're more likely to encounter, much more likely to encounter like a far left kind of Marxist type person compared to even just like a moderate conservative, right? And so there was that skew.
Sorry, yes, absolutely. And I remember reading that conservatives, I think it was that same research, that conservatives felt like they couldn't speak up anymore. And that was certainly not even conservatives, heterodox left thinkers. I mean, I felt around the category of woman becoming more and more kind of de-sexed. Sounds like a cat, but
and it's really interesting that threshold there about like when that actually is. Like, is it when you like feel so outnumbered that you don't like? I don't think it's quite a majority minority thing, right? Like if it's 60-40, left, right, I still feel as though you've got enough kind of colleagues to stand with you and to maybe take a stand. But when you start to get, as you said, those orthodoxies, and you really feel like there's no one standing with you, then you don't want to speak up, and those orthodoxies take hold and they start punishing kind of the outsiders. So there was that that ideological piece, and then I think the social media was just critical in that it allowed academics this kind of view into each other's minds in a way that they hadn't had before. I mean,
I agree.
I think you're posting on social media, there was this mix of the professional and the personal that people just seem to do, particularly on Twitter. And, and so people would just follow each other. Of course, you're going to follow your colleagues, see what they're saying. And they're posting about their latest papers, right? And then they're posting about like, oh, this political party, I hate what they said this. And then this debate, oh, I hate this person, or I love this person. And so I think the challenges there of being kind of an outsider in one way or another, where you kind of disagreed with an orthodoxy, that was just, being on social media in that way and expressing yourself in one way created a whole lot of opportunities, but also created the pitfalls, right? And you experienced the pitfalls in terms of writing, but very much you would also see people who would tweet something and then they would just get piled on, right? Like I remember seeing some like academics who, and I won't name them, but they would post, they're kind of lifelong feminists in a way, and they would post something that would be an affront to the new trans orthodoxy, and they would just kind of get piled on, right? And they would get in a way that I wouldn't have expected, not in a million years, to get piled on by their colleagues, and I'm sure they did. And I spoke to a couple of them, and they said, "Look, I'm getting off there because it's such a professional risk to me. Like I'm going to lose. I potentially already have lost professional opportunities because of this, because academia does rely on these kind of networks and professional and personal associations. Like, sure, you have professional networks and relationships, but they're also personal in one way or another. So they become personal. Yeah, right. Because you're spending time writing with people and going to conferences and hanging out. And so if you don't want to kind of compromise those, then you had to really tread carefully. And so there's, as I said, I've spoken to people who had just deliberately just said, look, this isn't worth it for me. But as a result, I think that, and that they felt like they were going to compromise their career and, getting grant opportunities, promotion opportunities, these publication opportunities. A lot of this stuff does rely on you being like a quote unquote a good academic and having the right thoughts and the right ideas. And
which
if you
is
didn't do that,
absurd, isn't it? I mean, when you really think about what it's meant to be, the separation of church and state, independent thinking as an end in itself, knowledge and truth as ends in themselves. But I mean, that's gone. That's absolutely gone. And anyone still holding to that, it strikes me, is outside the system. So it's not always, but mostly. And I think that, that happened at that time that you're describing. And I saw it with the younger staff or potential staff. It was about, I don't want to lose job opportunities. But there was another group that I knew more, and that was older people who didn't want to lose their legacy.
Yeah.
So some of the legacy feminists, after I wrote the J.K. Rowling piece, contacted me and said, that's so fantastic. And what on earth is happening? Like 1 minute ago, we could talk about these issues and now we can't. And I think it was actually the changing media landscape that meant that it wasn't possible. Because I remember, in the like discipline, if you want to call it that, of women's studies, this has been a live debate since the 90s. And I've seen really quite strong debates about this, but then everyone went for dinner afterwards. I mean, I saw one with Elizabeth Croft, who was like our version of Judith Butler in the 90s, having a debate with one of the RadFems, who was my lecturer, Renata Klein. And it was just intense, but then it wasn't the end of a friendship. Right. And I think that's what changed this sort of emergent, for want of a better word, tribalism that emerged in the internet age, and where everyone had skin in the game. It wasn't in some deep way, like it was their sister you were calling out, rather than an ideology or a difference of opinion. And I think that what we got paired to our tribes in some profound way through the new medium, that meant that we didn't have any kind of critical distance. I'm not sure exactly how else to describe it. That's how it feels to me, that the critical distance shifted. So it wasn't just that you had a different opinion. It's that you were wrong in a way that made you morally egregious.
That's right. You're bad.
Yeah. You weren't simply wrong. You were bad. Yeah, that's right. And that seemed to really take off. So that's the wonderful kind of historical moment and groundswell that we became friends in. Because we found ourselves both on the wrong side of that, didn't we? For different reasons.
Yeah.
But both on the wrong side of that. So that seems a good segue into invite you to talk a bit about you. So can you tell us a bit about you? I know that you did a PhD at RMIT or a postdoc. And so you want to tell us a bit about what your PhD was on, a bit of a brief, like Cliff Notes bio, and then we can get into your current research.
Sure. So I'm not a quote unquote cancelled academic or anything like that. So I did my PhD in like sustainability studies at UTS. And then I was doing a postdoc down at RMIT when, I guess when a lot of this stuff just started to develop online. Wrote several articles for Quillette, which is, for those that don't know, people probably know what Quillette is now, but I guess you would call it sort of a heterodox publication, kind of one of the original online publications to be writing a lot in this space, and joined Heterodox Academy kind of like the day that they allowed postdocs to register for it. It was because originally only for like tenured academics, because they were worried about students and postdocs that didn't have that tenure. They were worried that they might be kind of self-sabotaging their careers, and just found that organization and just the ideas around that just incredibly valuable. And so I did that, and then I was in academia for a little while. In academia, it's one of these things where you can take the high road or the low road, in that if you kind of get a tenured position, we don't really have tenure in Australia, but if you get an ongoing position and you get those ARC grants, and then you don't have it easy. I'm not saying academia is easy, but your work is more secure. Whereas there's kind of another road where you're chasing shorter term contracts, casual teaching and so on. And I was kind of on that lower road. And so I left academia in, like 2021, and I work for the state government now. It's great. Enjoy what I do. I work in the Department of Environment, doing various things, but still really interested in this space. And then
what do you mean by this space? The heterodox.
Heterodox space. I still write articles for Colette when I can.
I've noticed you're still writing.
And then just started working on this pronatalism stuff after for the last year or two.
After having a truckload of kids with your wife.
Well, we had an extra kid. Yeah, we did have another one. So we had
truckload, but that's 3 kids is now considered a truckload, isn't it?
This is part of what's interesting about the whole space, right? I told my friend who had 2 kids. I've got a 10 and an 8-year-old. And then I told my friend that I said, this was just a year ago or 2 ago. And I said, we're having another kid. And he looked at me and he's like, you're a psychopath. You know, I couldn't
Yeah,
believe that we
funny,
would
but
even
also
contemplate having a third kid, right?
yeah. Yeah, I had that reaction from family members with a third kid. And I know a woman who's got 4 kids, and we chatted about that. And she said she was borderline stigmatized for having 4 children. Right? Educated, middle class. Yeah. It's like it's unacceptable. And I was thinking about that when I was delving into your work a bit, and remembering when I taught sociology in a family at Deakin in the early to mid 2000s. And it was always the plebs, the proverbial plebs, and the royals had heaps of kids, but everyone in the middle had this, 1.8 or 2.5 or, that varied. But people who were
the U-shaped distribution.
Yeah, the U-shaped.
In terms of the income, right? So lots of kids at the upper incomes, lots
Really
of income
upper
at the lower.
incomes. And I thought, well, that's interesting. It's like cream of the crop, bottom of the barrel. So at some point, you don't care anymore about having more and more kids. And over here, there's just the wealth to sustain it.
Yes.
And is that still the case? Because I mean, that was in the early, there was 2005. I remember teaching that.
I think it's still the case. I think so. It's changing. I've actually got a colleague who's doing some kind of quant stuff, looking at a whole lot of different data sources to try to determine whether that's the case or not. He showed me some of the initial findings and seems to think that it's more the case in did he say metro areas compared to regional? I think he said regional. It's more of a kind of uniform distribution, but basically that wealthier people are still having higher numbers of kids.
Not poorer people. They're not.
Well,
anymore.
so I think that is, I think in the US, my understanding is that a lot of the fertility rate decline in the US has come from a substantial drop in the number of teenage pregnancies. And so they tend to occur more at the lower end of the income spectrum. So if those have dropped off a cliff, which they have, as I understand, in part because of the success of these, the education programs, contraceptives and so on, then maybe that's contributed to the lower numbers of kids at the lower end.
Interesting. Okay, so can you tell us a bit about what the problem is? Because I just jumped in there with the U-curve. What is the problem as you're framing it in relation about fertility decline? How would you define the problem? And then maybe we can talk about solutions later. But what is it that we're facing?
So the problem, as I see it, is that humanity, and I do take kind of a global view of this, but it also applies at the kind of the national and the regional level, isn't reproducing itself. So basic kind of demography is that you require on average 2.1 children per woman to replace yourself, right? Because it takes 2 to tango to produce a baby. And so women need to have on average around 2.1, and the 0.1 is due to like mortality before they have a chance to have kids and so on. So
okay, I've always wondered about those points. Particularly quantitative,
And so generally we've in past decades we've been well above replacement rate, and so in particularly like around the baby boomer period, it was very common to have 3-4 kids. It was more common to have really, really large families as well. So not common, but like you would get these situations where people, and they'd be still around, where they've come from a family of 10, 12 plus kids, right?
Well, definitely among Irish Catholic migrants, I used to live in Warrnambool, and a lot of those families were 6 to 10 kids at the boomer level. And the Gen X's that I knew, who are sort of my age, they came from families of 5. So their parents had 10 and 5, but they're still big families. So I know what you mean. There were outlier groups that had very large families, while the average might have been 3.5 or something?
Something like that.
Yeah. Right. So when you're talking about the baby boomers when they were born. So it's actually the so-called silent generation.
Yeah.
Grandparents of X's. Yeah. Okay. And so where are we at now, and how would you define that as a problem? Because you talk about civilizational issues, you talk about institutional issues, and in a way also interpersonal kind of issues. So how would you characterize that?
so it's been this just steady decline, essentially, where we've dipped it back down below replacement levels in sort of the 1990s. I don't know if you remember Peter Costello, the Australian Treasurer, had this kind of campaign. He said that people should have 3 kids, one for the husband, one for the wife, and one for the country. Trying to encourage people, he was trying to kind of establish a 3-child norm for kind of a normal sort of middle-class family, because that is kind of the number that you kind of require to be a normal, like a more normal family size, because obviously there's plenty of people that either don't want kids or aren't able to have kids, right? So there might be people, or there might be have various sort of issues in their life that don't allow them to have kids. There might be biological issues, they might be infertile, they might be in same-sex relationships, various issues that some proportion of the population isn't going to be reproducing. And so in a way that the people that can kind of need to carry the weight for them, so to speak.
In order to have a population that maintains it and or grows, but even just to maintain itself.
And that's actually what I'm sort of actually more interested in is this. I won't get ahead of myself, but essentially we've been declining down. And so then, that there was a time, at least in Australia, where we had those incentives for people to have kids. We had the baby bonus, and there was, they started talking about it, trying to encourage people to do it. It did creep up the fertility rate in Australia to just around 2, I think. And I remember the campaign. I remember listening to radio shows about it, saying that there's, we're in a baby boom, because this is long before I had even thought about these issues. But then since then, the late 2000s, we've essentially been on a decline, and it's actually going faster than like the ABS predicted. So in 2016 or so, the ABS, I think it was around kind of 1.7 or so. They sort of said, okay, our projections are that it could go up, it could stay flat, or it can go down. And what's actually happened is it's gone down faster than the lowest sort of projection that they've had.
So what is it now?
They're around 1.5 now, I believe. And of course, there's a huge amount of variation in that number. So the migrant population tend to kind of adopt their host country's fertility rate reasonably quickly by the next generation, sort of thing. So there was this concern among some people, particularly kind of on the right, that kind of would be getting overwhelmed by Muslims, for instance, because they come in with a really high fertility rate, not just here, but also in Europe. But I believe the evidence is that they, like I said, they tend to kind of moderate those large family sizes.
Is it like essentially once women get educated, and that's a whole can of worms, but they have far fewer children, and so that's all groups, all demographic and religious groups.
They do, but I think it's also to do with norms. I just think that a norm of smaller families plays a significant role, and when you encounter larger families less often, you're less likely to see that as kind of a normal or achievable or a desirable thing to do.
And they're all different, aren't they? Normal, achievable, desirable. You're right. The normal piece is just we're all sheep, even if we pretend we're not. That's a sociological fact. The desirable, that's interesting too, because somewhere in some of the material you sent me that I was reading through, I noticed something I thought was really interesting, and that is that this idea of bigger families is stigmatized, is seen as kind of lower socioeconomic status.
Low status.
And you talked about soft, what did you call it? Soft antinatalism, where one child keeps you still free and able to do stuff. And I think it certainly has in the left, as we've historically understood it, there's a kind of virtue in having one child because you're not damaging the environment or taking too many resources. So there's something, just to put it in colloquial terms, considered hillbilly about having more kids.
Exactly. I was so glad that you said that, because I sort of think about sort of archetypes for what like a large family is, and the two that come to mind are one, like Cletus from The Simpsons. He's sort of this guy, this like Southern guy who's on welfare, and he and his wife just keep popping out kids. Which is one. So that's kind of the archetypal like large family that's like on welfare, lowest socioeconomic status, and so on. And then kind of at the and then the religious families where they've got some kind of religious teaching or belief or worldview that sort of leads to them just having larger kids. So you said that with the Catholics. other religious groups
And
tend to
from
have.
the elite perspective, there's still, even if it's not said, looking down the nose at that.
Totally.
Like
Yes.
the Mormon families or
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's subtly coded as uncouth, which is what my friend who had 4 kids, it moved to socially unacceptable. 3, as you and I both know, is borderline. 4 is socially unacceptable in the middle class now, I believe.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Because, and I think some of that is that background kind of environmentalism, like thinking about kids as carbon emissions and so on.
I'll say that again. Thinking about kids as carbon emissions.
Emissions, yeah. So there's been a lot of articles sort of talking about, it'll say like, want to lower your carbon emissions, don't have kids or something like this, right? Or the kids are like the equivalent of taking an international flight every 6 months or something like this. So
it's so disturbing because it's the reduction of our humanity at some level. To view a child like that would be in almost any other historical period just considered sacrilegious.
Totally, yes. Like these are the ideas I think that are kind of undermining human civilization in that way. Like to the extent that they take hold in the community and people internalize them and forego having kids when they might otherwise have done. That those ideas get too widespread, then they have an effect. I think they already are having an effect. But yeah, we've got to be really, really careful. And that's part of what I want to do is sort of push back on that, because I really think the decision to have kids or not should be just cordoned off from that. I think we need to deal with climate change in other ways. Like we're not going to solve climate change by like just retreating down to nothing, And there's just so much that gets that's gonna so many negative impacts that are gonna come with an approach that sees humanity like that.
Not to mention, I mean, I don't want to rush ahead either, but the mental health implications. I mean, fundamentally, your family are there for you in a way. And I currently have a relative who's quite unwell, and a close friend's husband is dying of cancer. And, I've just suddenly encountered this in my immediate world. And, who is there for people is their family. It doesn't mean they're not accessing services, which of course are needed as well. But, they're operating according to a bureaucratic rules-based order, and that's as it should be. But the people who love you on a 24-hour cycle will take the call in the middle of the night, and that concerns me. I mean, what people say in the aging literature is if you don't have an adult daughter, you're in trouble, because it's the adult daughters who almost always do the care work of the aging parents as they do with the children. And then just even that change, like I see Gen X as the last generation who played outside, but also who had at least one, but usually a couple of siblings. And so now it's the loss of outside play, but also siblings make a big difference. And I know this because my kids are I joke that I have 3 only children, because one was born so far apart from the others. I had one child in my 20s, one in my 30s, and one at 40. And so it's kind of there's spaced apart enough that it's not just a gaggle.
Sure. Yeah.
And I see that families that have a gaggle of kids, especially if they're close in age and gender, they've got an instant community. Whereas I've spent years knocking on doors trying to get playmates for my kids. I'd rather they have playmates than not. And that's hard work.
Sure is.
I don't remember my parents having to do that. I mean, they did. They'd organise some things, but not in the way that I've felt the need to do, because there aren't siblings and cousins of the same age or even neighbours. And I think that changes the whole social landscape.
For sure.
There aren't a bunch of kids to play with on the street at any time for my children.
And then you see that it's probably going to play out in terms of kids spending more time on screens, instead of being outside playing with each other. And just what you were saying in terms of the I guess the kind of informal care that that family provides to each other intergenerationally. So like adult children, daughters, you said, primarily taking care of aging their aging parents. That's a huge amount of like informal labor, unpaid labor to the contributions to the economy. And so if you're kind of relying, if you're saying, oh well, you can we can have carers to take people, we can pay people to care for you, or the state will pay for that's all got to come from somewhere, that money and it's a lot more expensive to be paying a carer to do those jobs, to be taking those calls and paying those visits and doing that work, compared to having someone in your family who takes care of that. So
absolutely, and it loses that human element that's less tangible but very fundamental. It makes a huge difference to have someone who loves you. I mean, that's the whole childcare discussion too, isn't it?
Yeah,
someone who loves you, caring for you, is radically different to someone who's being paid to do it. I agree with Ali Hochschild. I don't think it should be mutually exclusive. I think when you've got serious illness or, round the clock dependence, and we don't live in a community, a collectivist community, we need a bit of both.
Yeah.
But I think the love piece, when that's lost, and that care and that family intergenerational care, it's massive. And these pared back families where there isn't, like the conviviality that comes at Christmas time or at weddings. I mean, they seem minor things, but I'm noticing that already. There's a shift to the next generation in terms of having children, and having that sense of camaraderie and family, I don't know, effervescence or
connection,
something from more people being present.
Yeah.
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 And I think, that's something that the countries that have like deliberately encouraged one-child policies and lower fertility, so like some of the Asian countries like China and South Korea, where they've sort of deliberately, like actually formally had policies like the one-child policy, but also a lot of kind of effectively kind of government propaganda to say, don't have too many kids, only have one kid, and pour everything you can into it. I think this is something that they've just totally overlooked, and it's going to be reflected in their, or maybe probably is already reflected in their society. I mean, as I understand it, there's a huge issue with aging people in China, just not being taken care for, like just been effectively, and experiencing all sorts of abandoned effectively.
Yeah. I noticed in Japan too, because I've got my best friend has been thinking about starting a nursing agency to actually bridge some of this, like care in the home. And I found, I was just looking at something, and I don't know, it became relevant. Maybe my phone had been listening to me, but I got something in my feed that was Hire a Grandma, and it was in Japan. And it was basically women at that end of the spectrum who didn't have adult children nearby, and they wanted to give as grandmothers, and people who didn't have grandmothers. So it was this kind of service where
trying to pair them. Matchmaking service.
But anyway, back to your work. Perhaps can you also outline what are some of the economic and social costs? So my understanding is with the age pyramid flipping, we just aren't going to have enough workers to pay into the various, we don't have enough tax base to pay for the services. That's right. So we've got this population pyramid that's flipped. I mean, that's when I was teaching sociology of the family. I'm assuming that's still the case.
Yeah.
And so can you describe that in kind of layperson's terms? What's going on with superannuation, the workforce? How does this declining fertility impact all of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, you need a certain number of, like, and I hate to use these terms, but like productive people, but essentially people who are working and creating value that can then be used to be redirected and redistributed to people who need it. And so in the case of aged care, you need a certain proportion of the workforce doing that in order to pay for the aged care services. So certainly that issue. There's the challenge, and I think part of the reason why fertility policy has been difficult is because you actually get that there's kind of a redistribution that has to happen at the bottom end as well, right? So if people start having large families, right, the government or society kind of has to support them in some way as well. So we've got to support people at the upper end, a little bit later in life, and we've got to support people at the start of life as well in terms of providing education and daycare and hospital care and so on. And so so you actually, even if you so it's actually kind of an investment in the short term. It's actually worse from a government budget point of view if lots of people start having babies straight away, and because you'll have that kind of bulge of people of people who need support at the lower end, at the earliest stages in life.
Do you mean things like they are not, say, the mums at home and not contributing to the workforce on their space?
That's so too,
that what you mean, or do you mean something else?
I just mean both of those things.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So there's the direct childcare, but there is also that element of people taking time out of mums, usually taking time out of the workforce, and so the government in a way doesn't like that, which is part of the reason they have this policy of wanting to get kids into daycare kind of as soon as possible.
Such an industrial machine, all of it now, like it out being open up opportunities, and now it's this machine that if you don't go to work, there's not enough of a tax base. It's quite but I mean, separate from how I might feel about that at a values level, I hear what you're saying, that there's these two ends of the lifespan that require input. And are you saying more has gone here than here, and that's why people aren't having babies as much? There isn't enough support. Is that what you're saying?
All I mean is that I think part of the reason why that's the government actually, in a way, sort of prefers lower fertility at the moment, right? Because you don't have to sustain your population in the earlier, you don't have to support your population in the earlier stages of life, like childcare and funds for giving birth and education and so on. Part of the reason why they actually, in a way, like migration is because you get these people that arrive that are birthed and grown and educated and trained in some way. And so I think they're sort of seeing that and a lot of people have seen this as a kind of a substitute because, and it's actually a virtue, right? But I question that. I think that migration has sort of it served this purpose for a while, and particularly in countries in like the Anglosphere, US, Canada, UK, Australia, and so on, and Europe, Western Europe, where you have these high rates of migration. And these are all also areas that have had kind of some lower rates of fertility.
It's covered that over in some way, hasn't it?
Yeah, papered over the cracks, I think. And you have this situation where, where we're looking past the ethics of this as well, right? I think that at some point, we're drawing on a sort of a flow of population that are coming from somewhere else, right? But in some cases, the migration actually contributes to fertility decline in those source countries. So, for instance, there's a migration from east to west in Europe, right? So Eastern Europe is experiencing fertility decline, but they're actually at the stage of experiencing population decline. So where their populations are actually contracting. And a lot of that is because people are moving away.
Well, I imagine like Ukraine because of the war.
That too. Yeah. Even before that though. And what population, what migration can do. There was a study that looked at, I believe it was Nepalese immigrants to Europe or the US and so on. And it suppresses fertility in those countries. So a lot of people's idea is that fertility is still high kind of in developing countries, and it's just developed countries that is low fertility. But what's actually happening, particularly in the most recent years, is that the fertility is like dropping off a cliff in a lot of these developing countries. And so we can't really just view them as this endless source of human capital that we're just going to kind of bring to our countries to sustain our economies.
It's interesting that it's seen as virtuous, and yet it's quite unethical, disrupting the continuity in their own countries, especially.
Yeah, well, I just think a lot of people don't even think about that aspect of it.
Explain that, because it's not necessarily clear. I didn't understand it when I read your article. So it has to do with the age at which they're leaving. Is that right?
Yeah. So people, migrants tend to leave when they're adults, but generally kind of younger adults is the most common for the population. So in their 20s and 30s and so on, because of the time in which they are going to be, would otherwise be having children.
Marriage and couple formation.
Yep. And so you spend time, so you get these stories of, for instance, young men moving to, like, emigrating from those countries like Nepal, going and like earning a wage somewhere else. And then they might return, just for a few weeks a year or something. But that's really disrupting the family formation phase of life, and they end up having less kids than they would otherwise if they had just stayed there. So although they might be getting a better, earning more money and so on, it does you raise these questions around, are we disrupting the fertility of these countries, and then they're going to be declining in population then we can't kind of just rely on them as this like endless source of people to support our own economies because we're not having enough kids.
Yeah. It's complicated, isn't it? And it's seen in this one-dimensional light that, this is virtuous to have immigration. And I remember, again, to quote Arlene Hochschild, she wrote a fabulous book with Barbara Ehrenreich, and they referred to it as a heart transplant because all the women in the West were going to the workforce and weren't available for their own kid. It was in Australia, but in, say, the US, lots of Mexican women coming in, often leaving their own children to be either not cared for at all or cared for by relatives. So it caused a real problem with care. And they, referred to it as a heart transplant.
I see, yeah.
Taking the love from one country, you might find that interesting for your work, actually, and moving into the Western countries, and we're taking the mother love from the country of origin.
Yeah, no, I like that.
Disrupting it in a profound way that's ongoing because development doesn't wait. So
no, exactly.
Continue to develop without their mothers. And these children are getting the love from a migrant, but a migrant who actually feels traumatized by leaving her own children. And that's going to be embedded there too. And, it's just so complex. And what are the ethics of one set of women getting professions? And it's not only women, of course, it's a family, it's a man and a woman, but still, while other women don't. And yet, I mean, as I well know, if you take years out to care for your kids, you're compromised completely in a career. I mean, that's a choice, but what kind of choice is it really? I mean, it's, So, I mean, just to back up again, we were talking about the different causes and consequences. And I think another cause you identify that certainly I agree with is around this sort of movement of women into careers and then the, incompatibility between work and caring, and then particular feminist discourses. So there's a kind of maternal feminism, as we've talked about, and I've written a lot about. That's probably my own vantage point. And then there's a kind of anti-maternalist or anti-natalist feminism. And I think you've written about that in poignant ways, how that's really shaped dominant policy. And there's outliers. Anne Mansell has been writing, Julie Stevens, myself, Carla, who have had a more pro-natalist feminism.
Yeah.
But how do you see this kind of implicit anti-natalist feminism shaping policy?
Well, I think so it's not just like formal policy. I guess it's norms as well in knowledge producing institutions. Right? So like universities, think tanks, corporations, and so on. Where I think there is an implicit antinatalism in there. In that you are penalised for indirectly, usually for taking substantial time out from your career to have not just have kids and raise kids. So generally you get pretty good parental leave entitlements if you are, if provided you're on the right sort of arrangement in terms of your employment. But the challenge is, okay, if you're willing to kind of do the bare minimum of that, right? Like, so if you have one kid, take 6 months out, it's probably not so big a deal, right? But if you want to have multiple kids and maybe you want to spend a bit more time out of them because you feel you're not quite ready to go back to work full time and throw them into daycare 5 days a week, then that starts to intrude on your career progression. And if it was just someone's individual choice to do that, then again, that might be one issue. But actually, I think that there's this developing kind of notion that women shouldn't do that, and that because there is so much focus now on like equity of outcome with regards to, for instance, like the key kind of milestones and indicators of academic success. I'm using academic here just because it's my experience.
And like, are there as many women professors as there are men? That kind of
Are they getting the same number of research grants? Are they same number of like executive leadership positions? And so this whole kind of DEI, gender DEI space, I think really is the focus on outcomes rather than opportunities and people's choice. And I recognize that people's choices are shaped by social norms and so on. But if you focus on that, then then women will feel as though they shouldn't be doing it. They will be kind of guilt tripped out of, for instance, taking some extra time out of the workforce to do that because they feel as though they kind of have a responsibility to the feminist cause, liberal feminist cause, career feminist cause, to kind of get back on the horse, get back to work as soon as possible and start hitting those goals. Because, and the longer you do take out of your career, it does have these kind of flow-on effects.
Compound interest effect in reverse.
Yeah, the compounding interest, that's the word, because you're not producing at that point in time, like you're not writing papers, you're not getting on projects and things, projects that you might have had are being disrupted, and that has kind of compounding effects further and further down the career track you go.
My observation is you're just not taken seriously after that. Your values lie somewhere else, and that's all very good, but oh well, goodbye. Yeah.
And certainly I've got colleagues who have experienced that. And so I think that actually, and it's interesting you say that they're not taken seriously. I think they're not taken seriously by the institution, and that include men and women who don't take them seriously, I would say. Right. Yeah, and I think for women who've taken the option of not having kids, I think they are just as resentful. Resentful isn't the right word, but just as kind of they're just as harsh as perhaps as men, as other people who towards mothers that have done that. I'm not trying to say that everyone does that, but it's
no. But I've heard that stated explicitly. Yeah. And I think you identify, and Lynn Craig's work already identified this because I used it a lot in my thesis. The gap between childless women and women with children in careers is as significant as the gap between, or nearly, men and women. And so actually what we see is and this is where I said it's motherhood, not womanhood, that is kind of critical index of discrimination. And it's definitely the case. Yeah. I mean, even our language too. I wrote this somewhere, I think in my book with Carla, time out. It presupposes that raising children, which is arguably the most fundamental thing we do in our lives, that could be defined as time out is already, the language is already Orwellian in how it shapes our perceptions about what we're doing. And I think that's the way these norms also operate, is this implicit, you talk about the implicit ideology in media and advertising, and it's true, and the institutions, but even in the choice of language.
Yeah, so it's saying, like, here's the thing you should be doing, focusing on your career, kicking those goals, reaching these milestones. And then you don't want to take too much time doing the other thing, the unproductive thing. I mean, I had a colleague who was told by another colleague of hers that their science, while she was at home with her baby, their science had gone to the stars, right? Without them, or you're spending too much time while you're back at home with your baby.
Okay.
Yeah. And so
we've taken this research so far. And was it an implicit you're no longer part of this science project, or?
Well, I think to some extent, you get left behind, right? When you're not around to kind of be on those projects.
And maybe it's inevitable too. I mean, I don't know. I'm being a bit magnanimous now, like, less skin in the game as my kids get older. And I think maybe there is something where you can't have it all, okay? And I know that's a very loaded statement because, that's always been said, you can't have it all to women, but, fathers potentially have it all if they have a wife. And I'm not at any way, I could hear my daughters listening. I'm not saying don't try and achieve your goals or your ends. I wouldn't support them to do so. But there is something where maybe that level of, as in a scientist who's at the research level, can't be combined with mothering a young child. I don't mean to sound negative. I mean, maybe we just need to take a few years and go, I've made this choice. I'm going to mother this child. And at this point, I can't be an astrophysicist. But I might be again. I mean, I think we forget that this sort of, once kids are raised, even to 15, 16, 17, a woman can do a
lot of life left.
Yeah, that's right. Like I've watched my friend who was a stay-at-home mum for many years and reinvented herself post-divorce. I mean, there was an imperative, and is now like doing amazing work at a very high level after raising a family. Yeah. And so, there's that too that I see for women. I remember Andy Fox writing about that. She had that fabulous Blue Milk blog. That there's all these women who go back to careers, but it's defined as like something you can't do. And there's a sort of madness in that. There is an economic cost. I'm not denying that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, two things there. There's that professor, her name's Catherine Pakaluk. I think she's like an economics professor in the States. Has had eight kids, and is now like an esteemed professor of economics in the US. She was interviewed on ABC for a piece on pronatalism recently.
Absolutely.
So like And so I thought that was really interesting because she's someone who's kind of like the super mum archetype in that like you're going to raise 5 kids and you're still able to kind of achieve in that that sphere that a lot of people say you have to kind of compromise in. You have to some degree pick one or the other. You're not going to excel at both. Yeah. And
there's always exceptional people. I mean, she's obviously exceptional.
Sure.
I mean, the political scientist, political philosopher who I really loved. I can't think of her name now, but she also had 5 children and was a full professor. And it's done by some exceptional people.
Yeah.
And it's of course it's possible, but I suspect that there is something, and this ties into the whole transformation we've had in a post-industrial society without that sort of extended family. Because a friend of mine was doing anthropology and went and lived in a village, and there was so much support from other she would do hours on her thesis every day. So the small families piece, back to that earlier point, means that we don't have the extended family support. You don't have the aunt down the road, the grandmother in the house, so it's this sort of families are really on their own with parenting, the way that I don't think is well understood. Like, the research on like the hours women spend actively mothering is that it's increased since the 50s, and our understanding is, it must be going down. But no, because in the 50s, the mum was like, and the kids were all, and so she could have been doing other things. I'm not saying she was doing high level science, but she wasn't having to be this sort of round the clock supervision of one child or 2 children who she's ferrying around. And it was just a lot looser somehow. I think demands have increased as the population has declined, paradoxically.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so I think that's why you get this situation where you have kind of fertility deserts in different parts of like a country or a city where it's much easier to have a larger family when there are lots of other large families around and the kids are entertaining each other and providing that support. And there's an idea in the book talking about sort of proximity as like fertility infrastructure. When you've got your parents, like your aging grandparents that are retired age around, and cousins and close friends and so on, it is much easier than if you're just this isolated nuclear family trying to do it on its own. I mean, the conservatives have sort of celebrated the idea of the nuclear family for so long, but it was always it's an illusion, right? Or you need the village to help do this successfully.
Most don't have.
I know, but increasingly so, right? So So as it goes down, then that support also withers away.
Sorry, what do you mean? Oh, yes, as fertility goes down. Absolutely. And that's that whole thing of the families decreasing. Yeah.
And then we've also had this this issue of what I call it intergenerational scattering of people, in that a lot of people have had to move away from where they grew up, particularly if they grew up in a city.
For jobs, you mean?
Yeah, for jobs, but also like for house, just to be able to afford to buy a house. Right?
Yes, yeah.
And so because housing prices have gone up so much, younger people don't have nearly as much capital as older generations do. They've had to move away further from their where they grew up, and usually where their parents are. That means that they've had to rely on formal daycare more so than just relying on grandparents to provide that informal care and various other kind of support for raising kids. So that's also a challenge in that, if you're surrounded by your extended family, they're within, I don't know, 10 or 20 minutes drive. That's a lot of support that would be provided to you compared to being interstate or overseas, which we're doing a lot more of now. We're forming relationships with people internationally and moving interstate, and it's taking away from a lot of the kind of the roots and support networks that we otherwise would have had, or certainly that past generations have had.
Yeah, I noticed that in the material you sent me, and I took note of it. You said, here it is, staying put. Why is this important? Yeah. So you're saying, and it makes a lot of sense, and I've certainly observed it anecdotally, but you're saying that the sociology of this is that we're mobile now in ways we never used to be, and that's breaking up family formation as well, probably for the same reasons as as the migrants are having. Yeah. But you're linking that to housing prices. So if you grew up in a city, you can't afford to buy a house down the road from your parents anymore. So you go an hour away and do super commuting, but your parents then aren't near you to help or your siblings or, Okay. So can you maybe map out how staying put, it might be obvious, but I think it's an interesting point, how staying put helps fertility?
Well, it's not necessarily staying put. I use this metaphor called the boomerang metaphor, which is the idea that when you're in your kind of your late teens, early 20s, you want to discover yourself. You want to forge an identity that's independent of your parents.
Yeah.
You don't want to be too close. You don't really want to be you definitely don't want to be in the same house as them, right? And having them too close, they're always coming around. Anyway, you want to try to forge an identity independent of them. And so you go and explore and you travel and you move around, meet people, meet a partner somewhere else. But what I see in kind of my generation is that they don't, or they haven't been able to engineer it so that they can kind of come back easily. And so
which is what people used to do. Yeah, then come back and live near. Yeah, or sometimes I see parents move near high income earning couples. I've seen that with a friend. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes if you can get the parents to move close to you, then that
even
can
better.
really be good. Yeah, but a lot of my friends who have grew up in Sydney, and a lot of the friends who have had 3 kids, generally, no, I don't really know anyone with more than that, but they've been able to do that. They got in slightly earlier in the property market, so it's slightly more affordable. But their parents are also kind of around and been able to provide that support, and so they didn't have. And they did kind of travel and do various things, but they found a way to kind of get back, and I think that helped them to kind of boost their fertility and have a slightly larger family. Than the prospect of doing that when you're, say, overseas or interstate, is much more sort of daunting, I think.
Oh, I think so too. And the difference is dramatic. I only have had one close friend who had that, but as the Matthew principle, to those who have more, there will be much given or something. Anyway, I just see how that kind of multiplies itself. So both sets of parents lived close by and actively, like fought over who could do sleepovers.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, can you even imagine?
Yeah. And you say this to like a 20-something-year-old, and that would be a nightmare, right? Having both said,
that's right.
Yeah. And so it's a totally different mindset from having kids, and like this sort of speaks just to the transformational aspects of having kids. Is that I think it just totally realigns your priorities on this sort of thing, and in a way, we're born childless. We're in adolescence, we're kind of childless. And if you don't have kids, there's no step change there in terms of that realignment of priorities. You can sort of just keep doing the same thing that you're doing. But if you have kids, these sorts of things that you really do need to be considering, and almost like the sooner the better that you can think of those. I mean, some of the highest areas of fertility in the United States are those kind of stereotypical like regional sort of country communities where, and the whole family hasn't left the state or something like this, and of course we kind of laugh at that as,
well, it's the hillbilly point again.
Yeah,
the
hillbilly point. Yeah. And we laugh at that as sort of, enlightened, educated, well-traveled individuals, but there's benefit to it from that point of view.
We have kids and then we're crying because there isn't that support. So I see it here too. Back at the farm because it's school holidays at the moment, and so Tom and I are here at the moment. And I see there's several families. It's on the Wikipedia page. It's so funny. You look it up, Bellato. There's like 4 families that have been here for 5 generations, and they're all around the corner from each other. And I know another family locally who I hang out with sometimes, and they're like, "Oh my God, like it's just incredible because their kids grow up and then they just move down the road." And at first it seems parochial, pedestrian, whatever, but when they're having families, it's wonderful. And they lunch together. The grandparents look after the little ones, and on the schedule that helps the parents, not what is the more middle class kind of educated model, which is grandparents live far away, travel a lot. It's around their schedule.
Yeah, that's right.
in the working class, it's actually oriented to the next generation who are working and raising kids. And that's a different mindset too.
Totally.
And that's an interesting point you made about the soft the soft antinatalism, the freedom mindset never really being relinquished by people. And I thought that was interesting because that is actually a whole cultural ethos, isn't it? I mean, I'm a classical liberal. I'm, like you, we met around freedom of speech issues and heterodoxy, and I want the individual rights to be sanctioned. But at the everyday level, the sort of valorization of the individual has meant that we've just lost that sense of family, particularly in the educated middle class, and how important it is. And I think that long period of not having children, I know because I had a child, like a baby out of wedlock in my early 20s, it meant that I understood that from the get-go. And it also meant that my parents were able to be really involved with my daughter because they were still young. Like my mum was literally in her late 40s when I had Mia. And the difference between grandparents who are in their 50s and 60s versus grandparents in their 70s and 80s, it's very different. I think we're coming to grandparent at the ages that many of us are still parenting, because my parents had vitality and were really able to engage. And so that's another set of issues where careers push that back so far.
For sure.
All the way along, the family is being frayed at some level. Okay?
Yeah. And I think what I sort of want to do with work on pronatalism is promote the idea of sustained reproduction in that. Sorry, I haven't really phrased that very well, but essentially,
what do you mean by that?
Well, I think our responsibility, I do think there's a response, insofar as people are able to, I think there's a responsibility to have kids, right? Of course,
Andrew, watch out. You might become a cancelled academic saying that.
I'm very aware of that, right? But I think when we think about it from this point of view, of we're facing this reality of future population decline, okay? I think a lot of countries have demonstrated that it's difficult to turn fertility rates around. And so we're sort of on this downward trajectory. And so as we get further and further down, I think that responsibility actually increases to have kids. So when you're in a situation like the baby boomers, let's say fertility rate is 3.5 or whatever, and lots of people everywhere, it's not much of a problem but for people, if people don't have kids, right? Because there's going to be plenty of people, a lot of people are just picking up the slack. And you get down to a situation, let's say like South Korea, fertility rate of 0.72, okay? And that means for every 100 great grandparents today, so we're thinking about the people who are born today, when they become great grandparents, there will only be something on the order of like 4 or 5 or 6 great grandchildren, right? So the rate of decline, the rates of decline are compounding and really drastic, and they're counterintuitive. And so for every person essentially that has a child in that situation, proportionally, it's much more important for sustaining the population, right? Like I said, when there's abundance of people, it doesn't matter so much. But when people become more scarce, then each person that is born is more valuable to sustaining that population. And so, so I do think increasingly there is this, I think, a responsibility to have kids insofar as you're able to. Okay, I'm not saying that people who can't have kids for whatever reason, there's this distinction between voluntary and involuntary childlessness. Totally right. I think those are completely different categories. There are so many people for whom their life, just the way that their life has unfolded, has just meant that they haven't had kids. I'm aware of that. But insofar as you have the economic resources, you have a partner, you're in a stable situation, you have the right personality and so on, I think there is a responsibility to, and I'm aware that is kind of an affront to the sort of sacred values of liberalism. Like I talk about this as the paradox of fertility in terms of liberalism, because the more we valorize the idea of freedom and independence, then children are a constraint on that freedom, whether we like it or not. Of course, they're fantastic in so many ways and necessary, but I think there's little doubt that they are a constraint on that freedom. And so that means that I think that if we want to sustain the population, freedom can't be the sole kind of value driving society, right? I think we do need something else. We need some kind of notion of an obligation or a responsibility to humanity. For some people, it might be the world, it might be the globe, humanity as a species. For other people, it might be at kind of a lower sort of like national level or cultural group level. And certainly this is, I believe, part of the reason why Israeli culture is so high fertile, is that they kind of see themselves as a people that they need to sustain.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. My understanding is Russia also, I don't know what their rates are, but I know Putin has support, and Hungary and some of those sort of more right-wing countries open pronatalists. Like they give baby bonuses that let you stay home for a couple of years, and they really,
Well, they're trying. I mean, they've also been trying to sort of raise the status of mothers. So they're like giving, they've got these interesting policies where, like, if you have 4 or more kids, you don't have to pay income tax as a mum. And they're giving medals to mums who have like four kids or more.
I should tell my friend at the stigma here and having 4 kids. But I mean, then you draw, I mean, it starts to be like, I mean, the Nazi propaganda around mothers was intent that, your value is as a mother. You know, that also kind of rankles me. So I want to value it. But then there's this like medals. I don't know, that sits weirdly.
And you don't want to stigmatize people that don't have kids, right?
Exactly.
Like if you valorize it so much, you don't want to like make the people who can't have had kids to kind of feel ostracized in any way as well. So we need to strike that balance. It's tricky.
Yeah, it is tricky. And it might be, I mean, somewhere in the notes you gave me, there was this sort of psychology piece, because it can't be taboo to talk about the value of care or the value of having children. It shouldn't be a zero-sum game with someone who couldn't or chose not to. But part of the can't is also freighted with ideology, insofar as sometimes people can't have kids because they only start at 39.9 and a half.
Yeah.
And no one along the way has kind of framed it as, fertility declines precipitously in women. Well, I think it's quite significant from 35 to 40, and then it just drops off a cliff at 40. And so, not really understanding that, because of the anti-natalist discourse that's so pervasive, a lot of women don't understand that. At 30, they still feel and look like spring chickens in the West. But actually, you've got 5 years to get a lot of stuff sorted.
Yeah.
And that's what those books by Leslie Canold, who talked about social infertility. And, there was being discussed in the early 2000s as women it was defined that they were socially infertile because they didn't partner in time. So she was already identifying that there wasn't that kind of framework to support women whose fertility, I remember she said ours is like a letterbox, whereas men's is like a 2-story house. The time frame, but I think it's funny because you've got to get it done by 40 for a woman.
Yeah.
And yet if you're getting educated until you're in your mid to late 20s, and then you're building your career and somehow figuring out to find a spouse and get married, a lot of women aren't starting that journey until, that are educated, they're mid to late 30s. And that's where the sort of, the quote unquote hillbillies are starting much earlier. But then there's problems there in terms of marriages collapsing because men don't have the jobs. And so there's some interesting sociologies there where women are choosing motherhood over marriage. They want both. Right. They need to make choices. And I feel that in the middle class and the upper middle class, they're often choosing career and or marriage over children.
Right.
But what we're seeing is at both ends, it's difficult to have both.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself, I think, is a problem. Like what 5 minutes ago was just normal. And we see this in multiple domains, like being able to own a home or, what was normal a minute ago seems to be now elite. Like marriage is now an elite institution, for example, where it was for everyone not long ago, but now it's elite to get married and elite to stay married. And I think...
And home ownership as well, becoming elite. I mean, getting older and older. And in some ways it's totally rational to not want to start a family and start that big kind of commitment when you could be kicked out of your rental property in 3 months' time, right? And it's particularly, it's a hassle for anyone, but particularly a huge hassle, it's worse than that, when you've got kids, because you're disrupting not just your own kind of sense of place, it's them as well. And moving schools and changing friendship groups and different daycare arrangements. So, I mean, one idea I had was that I'm going to talk about in the book was an idea for a kind of a long-term rental platform.
I've written it down. Stable long-term family rentals. In fact, I was going to get to solutions, but can I just say something before we go there? I know that in the most visceral of ways at the moment because I was just required to leave my rental. So I own a property, but we're not living in it because I want the kids to go to a particular school that's good and my daughter got a scholarship there and so on. So I made the decision because there was so much driving. She's really active in performing arts and I was just driving all the time. So I've moved 40 minutes away to the town where the school is. And we had the best rental. I mean, it was the best. It was like this rambling 50s house with like a big backyard with herbs and roses. We lived there for years. I've lived there for 3 years. And then the owners just decided to sell.
Right.
And if I hadn't have owned a property, I would have felt I was able to tide over and somewhere. And but it meant I did, ask my tenant to move on. And I just felt that in a visceral way that I've never felt before. We found a place around the corner, but it's exhausting to me.
Yeah.
And I went a big house to a little one. So I'm now into this massive clear out. And so, but I still am in a very different position because I own a place. I can't imagine what that would feel like to have children and be told to move. So I agree with you that this is all part of the mix. The loss of the intergenerational support, the loss of the playing on the street, women moving into the workforce. There's so many things coming together that you almost got to go, what is going on? It's like very soon we won't even be able to have children.
I know, yeah. I mean, this guy Dan Hess, he's he writes on fertility, and he's got a Twitter account at More Births. He's really good. He talks about this idea of the fertility stack, that there's no kind of silver bullet and there's no kind of single variable. It is this whole stack of little different things that contribute to the outcome of higher or lower fertility, and so and just because a lot of the things that kind of worked for us in the past to keep fertility high, like lack of contraception, like high marriage rates, low cost of housing, a lot of these things have kind of like sense of community and people's participation in churches and so on.
Getting married early,
Yep. A lot of that has just kind of fallen by the wayside, and it's not to say that like there's been no benefit from that, but it just means that a lot of those things that that kept that fertility high are now gone. So we need to kind of, I think we need to sort of be looking both backwards and forwards at the same time. We need to be looking at how we can revive some of those things where it's appropriate to do so, but we also kind of need to be thinking outside the box and looking at new solutions. You can't uninvent the pill, right?
No, you can't. You can't put that Pandora back in the box. Notwithstanding Harrington and Perry's call for that. That's not going to happen. And I don't think women would want that. I just don't.
No, I agree.
So you've got a few solutions. I wrote 3 down here: stable long-term family rentals, superannuation, back parental leave, workplace fertility metrics. I'll get to that in a minute. But tell us those, maybe elaborate on what some of your solutions are. And I assume you're writing this in your book on pronatalism.
Yeah.
Oh, who's the publisher, by the way? Or is it still, are you going to pitch it down the track? Or?
I'm going to pitch it, Yeah.
Okay. It's so interesting and so important. You've really tapped a gap here because it's not being done. It's not.
Yeah.
There's kind of comments by people like Elon Musk, who seems to be doing his darndest to fill the gap.
That's right.
He's up to
not in the most ideal way, I would say. I mean, I don't think firing kids to, 8 different women, 14 different kids, or whatever. I mean, that's obviously the level that we want to be encouraging. I think that just going like that, I think that doesn't promote sustained fertility, because I think, insofar as you want to bring up kids who themselves want to have kids, I mean, having that sense of belonging is so important for that.
Yeah, it looks like elite corruption to me. At some level, I can't do this, so I will. So sorry, back to your solutions. And and the other thing, I'll just peg it to mention so I don't forget, but I'm interested in how we've gone from this sort of poor early population bomb idea that I certainly inculcated. This is bad for the environment. This is, got too many, to like, my God, we're falling off a cliff and we're talking about this as a civilizational issue. I'm quoting you, and it is. And I mean, there's other work too. There's I think she's an endocrinologist, Sonia, wrote her name down because I wasn't sure. Well, Shauna Swan. I don't know if you know her work, but she's talking about she's defining it as a civilizational issue too, but she's talking about the massive decline in sperm count.
Yeah.
That's so phenomenal as a result of everything, BPAs, glyphosate, chemicals.
Yeah.
So that's her angle because she's a scientist or an endocrinologist. But sort of got a number of things coming together as well, our levels of pollution, which does tie into environmentalism. But so we seem to have flipped from this sort of Paul Ehrlich population bomb, this is out of control, that we all read and went, oh my God, yes, we need to really hand this back and we're taking over and, it's unnatural. We're like a cancer, like people say. I no longer think at all, but
a virus sort of thing.
Yeah. And then you've got this other, where you're at now saying we're really in trouble, like any minute now. Like, Shauna Swan says this is so dire that we could be extinct. And I know people said, the Japanese will be extinct or the South Koreans or the Italians, but not humanity. But now you've got people saying that we might be facing extinction. Is that true? I mean, it feels hard to believe.
And so I don't think it depends what you mean by extinction, right? Like, obviously, the fertility rates are below or about to be below. They're below replacement rate in all regions except Sub-Saharan Africa and Northern Africa and the Middle East. Right? They're the only ones that are, and particularly Sub-Saharan Africa, that's still really high. But they're projecting that to just kind of decline really quickly over the next kind of 100 years or so as they develop, I guess. And
right, okay. Yeah. So that development.
They just kind of go through that demographic transition. And so that leads, and so insofar as the world has growing population, and this is part of the reason why, like, the people who are concerned about population growth still have some kind of basis, I suppose, to be concerned for, is that Africa's population growth is going to be the thing that sustains the world's population growth overall for a little while, right? And it's still growing a lot. But it's not a solution for us, like in Europe and Asia and so on, the Anglosphere, to just rely on Africa as a source of human capital to sustain our own populations. Right? So, I mean, both in terms of ethically, I think, but I don't think just importing all their kind of excess people into our society, I don't think that's a viable solution in terms of, culturally,
for myriad reasons.
Assimilation, myriad reasons. And so we are going to face it. I mean, the population will sort of still going up for a little while, and then it's going to plateau. But then once we're in that kind of global decline, I think that's going to be where things get much more hairy in terms of we won't have Africa kind of buoying the rest of the world for its population growth.
I think the symbolism of that, like we're ultimately evolved out of Africa, and yet now it's Africa holding the fort. Yeah. Okay. And my understanding is that we've got this effect. I saw that on the Quillette video and I've read that before, maybe in your article, but where we've got a hangover of previous generations' fertility that like the rocket launching, even if you switch it off, it still goes for a while. So we've got fertility that's still growing because of previous generations. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Baby boomer generation and the various kind of echoes that come sort of through the generations. Baby boom was really big. And so then their kids are going to be, even if they're sort of lower, that generation is still bigger. But it sort of just declines and declines.
Yeah. Okay. So each generation's having less, essentially.
Yeah. Yep.
So will it suddenly fall precipitously, like women's fertility after 40? Is that what we're looking at now? Like what South Korea has?
Well, once these larger generations come through and die out, essentially, then I think it will go through decline much faster. And so that's the situation with like South Korea and so on, is that I think, I can't remember if they had a real baby boom, but once these kind of larger populations get old and pass away, then you get much faster declines, essentially.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And that's why it's civilizational, because we could end up in a situation, well, I guess just pragmatically, where we can't afford to sustain the dependence in the culture, whether they're older or younger or ill. And then also we start to have an issue where there just aren't enough people.
Yeah, I think that you get this situation, again, it is speculative to some degree, but I think one of the commentaries that's been made on South Korea is that society there is just antenatal it's not that they're like hugely positive about having people and so on. It's a very different culture to say Israel. They have all these kind of quirks and cultural traits that mean that the culture just doesn't value having kids in the way that other countries do. So, for instance,
just me because it's an Asian country, and they normally love kids in Asian countries. That's been my observation. But
but like Lyman Stone, his demographer, he talks about how South Korea has these K-pop stars, which are Korean pop stars, and they're contractually obliged to be childless. And so, his argument is that this kind of reinforces norms of like youth and independence and freedom, which are kind of, and if they settle down and have kids, they lose their contract, right? And so the kind of the biggest stars and idols of their society effectively are these, they don't value family life in that way. I think there are some other things going on, but I think what happens, what my concern is that society sort of starts going down a kind of, there's a path dependency associated with low fertility, in that the less kids you have and the lower fertility you are, the more society kind of orients around that assumption. So
that becomes the default norm.
It becomes the default, so you don't have, like, for instance, like businesses and economics that cater towards high fertility. So we're starting to see this now, I think, with housing. Increasingly, we're building a lot of apartments, right? So this is one of the criticisms of Asian countries, is that they've built a lot of apartments in these big cities like Seoul, and they just aren't suitable for having families, let alone large families. So my concern is, it'd be great if you're an independent, person who wants to like walk to work or catch public transport, and you just want to go and sit and you want to go out to cafes and
If you're very young, an urban environment can
it can be great, but not so great for having kids. And so that's part of my concern with a lot of this densification that's happening in Australia's cities, and I assume elsewhere as well.
I haven't heard that densification.
Just like building a lot of apartments to make the housing higher density, but you don't preserve the backyard, you don't preserve the 3-4 bedroom houses that make it easier to have.
Absolutely. Okay, so maybe tell us a bit about your solutions then, because you seemed like you weren't keen to say, yes, we're going to drop off a cliff because we're not sure. It's one possibility. Then it's not like this is.
It's just a longer term thing. I mean, mathematically, we go extinct if replacement fertility is below 2.1. The question is, how long does that take? And if your total fertility rate is at 0.72, you go pretty quick, right? That like I said, that 100 great grandparents down to sort of 4 or 5 great grandchildren, that's a pretty precipitous decline. And there's actually an interesting analogy here, which is that when we're talking about species decline, so animal species, when a species is classified as endangered is when it loses 50% of its population in either 10 years or 3 generations. So,
does that mean South Korea is in the same place as the koalas?
South Korea is most definitely in endangered population, because we obviously, it's not 10 years, we're talking about generations, right? But they have such a low rate of reproduction that they are critically endangered, in my view. Obviously, it takes a long time for that to play out, because a human generation is, 30 years or so. So that's sort of, we're talking about a 90-year period. But from the point of view of how endangered they are and the decline in their population, that's definitely the case. So they're going to be experiencing much more than 50% decline. And in fact, a lot of countries, a surprising number of countries, are below that threshold, where if the mathematics gets a little tricky, because we still have these larger generations still hanging around. They're still showing up in the statistics. But once they kind of pass through that, then a lot of countries which are at, like 1.3, like Italy, I think is at 1.2, and a bunch of countries, they are below this endangered threshold. So I think I haven't seen anyone else talk about in terms of the endangered classification they use for animal species, but that's what I'm going to be talking about in the book, is how it actually applies to humans as well, and we're being it's being obscured by the immigration in so many countries, and this is part of the
the issue is that, and the reliance on immigration as a crutch. Like I don't mind immigration to sort of support growth in principle, but when it's been used as a crutch, as a substitute for really low native fertility, then it becomes a problem, because it is obscuring this decline that would otherwise be happening, and where you see in places like Japan, because they don't have hardly any immigration. And that's where you're getting this like emptying out of regional towns, and you can villages just sort of thinning out, and empty houses everywhere, and schools shutting down and so on.
That you can hire a grandma.
Yeah.
So tell us your solutions, and then perhaps we wind up, because I'm conscious I've had your time for a while, and you're working. So what are some of the solutions you see, at least in our context, our country?
I think the first thing we need to do is get better data on this. Is that we have this really kind of crude fertility rate that kind of gets reported. When the stats come out, and it's getting more and more. It's hard to talk about this because I think there has been this just it's been overlooked as an issue, right? I compare it to climate change. In terms of climate change I'm not saying climate change is an issue, of course it is. But if you look at, say, that just the amount of kind of institutional resources that are directed towards climate change, combating climate change, that orders of magnitude more significant. We essentially don't really have anything towards fertility, short of like these occasional baby bonuses and things.
So you mean in terms of institutional support for having that, or for research?
For research into this, to actually understand the problem. And so I looked at ARC grants that had fertility in them, and I think there's like one, aside from the ones that are focusing on like animal, there's essentially like one, where he's having climate change, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And so there's a big discrepancy there for what I think is going to be in the long term a significant issue for humanity.
I agree.
So I think a big part of it is getting better data on this. So I've got this idea for it's a workplace fertility metric. So it's to try to understand which industries and companies and so on actually support fertility, support people having families. And I think, again, I've got a colleague who's sort of done some initial work on this, and it's unsurprising that like the arts and sort of academia knowledge economy are low. So, although they might offer these
it's a flexibility
work and things like that, you've got to sort of question is and of course there is sort of a selection there, in that I think if you have chosen not to have kids, it makes more sense for you to kind of pursue like a professional career where you can kind of construct a professional identity around, because when you have kids, in a way your identity is made for you. Right? You just become a mum or a dad, whether you like it or not, and you orient yourself and identify in that way. I think if you don't have kids, a professional identity is sort of in a way a substitute for that. And so and I think that requires not just having a job per se, but I think having a career makes more sense, particularly when you've got career. There's potential for like career progression, so you can advance in your career and attain status and seniority in your career. I think that also helps. So there's definitely a selection effect there. Like there's definitely more childless people in academia.
Particularly shown. I didn't know.
Definitely overrepresented. Yeah, it's not like they're the majority or anything like that, but they're certainly overrepresented compared to like the normal levels in the population.
Interesting. Okay, so the three things you're talking about is rentals that would support families long term. Is that one of them? Can you explain that? Because you had a link, but I didn't have time to click on it before we spoke. But I saw there was a link. Is it for family rentals? I thought, oh my God, I should look at that.
I can't remember the link, but the idea is that essentially, I think it's unrealistic to, in the current housing economy, to say that people should just give people houses. And so I'm trying to sort of work within the constraints of the current housing market, which is that we have a lot of people having to rent, but and of course, affordability and being able to own a home is really important. and that would be the best solution. But given the current constraints, ensuring stability of rental contracts, like long-term stability, would be a better situation than, as I said, being able to get kicked out in a few months' time and having to upend your life.
My dad has always said that in Germany you can rent for a lifetime. I don't know the details, but I had a client in my therapy practice who owned a property in Holland somewhere, and the tenant is as long as they. We have a homeowner society, so if you don't own a home, you're really disadvantaged. Whereas they have long-term rentals with huge amounts of rights. So you're saying bringing a little bit of that Central European policy model here so that people could have longer term rentals to feel the security that enables them to start families.
Yep. To build a nest.
Build a nest.
Yeah. Call it Nestor. Nestor was the name I had for it. Yeah.
Oh, you got to start up. Right. You have ideas. I want that. Yeah. I think that'd work. And then, but it's getting the housing stock that people agree, but maybe you could get
the landlords on board, right? Like I think maybe they like to be able to. Another facet of that would be if a landlord did have to, like they signed up to this contract, but if they did have to sell the property or whatever, then the platform would give you like priority access to other rental properties in that area, so that you have kind of got this fallback position. Like you can't kind of force landlords to not sell their house if their property if they want to. But having some kind of fallback position where like you've got a better chance of being able to find a place nearby, so you don't have to totally upend your life. I think that would give young families a bit more assurance that, okay, maybe we can do this.
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea, and we do need that support. I mean, having just done it, moving nearby, although it was disruptive, everything else remains the same. My daughter still works at the pizza shop, they're 5 minutes to school, all that's the same. And that makes a huge difference. If you had to move further out, as I've seen with renting families, that gets really hard.
Yeah.
Okay. What was the second one? Was about superannuation. Now, what was your idea there? Was that like you could dip into it?
There is that idea. And I know that is kind of a concern, particularly for women who end up with a whole lot less super in retirement. It is an idea being floated around in the US, I think, to if you wanted to have the option of taking an extra 6 months out of your work to support yourself while you have kids. This is after like a period of, I guess, government or corporate maternity leave. Then that should be an option. I mean, a lot of people are arguing that you should be able to draw into your super for homes and various things. So I understand these issues, but I think prioritizing that or recognizing that the people who want to stay at home with their kids, particularly mums who want to stay at home with their kids for that kind of critical development period in those early years, should be enabled to do so. And to the extent that the state can support that, then we should be doing that. If the state isn't able to support that, and we can help them to support themselves to do that by drawing on like resources that they might otherwise have later on, and kind of bringing that forward in terms of super, drawing down your super early on, then that might be, and another idea was to like, maybe you could work an extra year or two to support that or something like that.
Oh, you mean at the other end, like
at the other end. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's interesting. Well, they allow that. I noticed that people can draw on their super for certain medical treatments, like the cancer and so on. I think the only thing that I'm thinking there is that the women might be too young to have built enough super.
This is true.
If women are having kids at 30 and they only just started really working in their late 20s.
Yeah.
But I mean, maybe some do and maybe partners do. And so it's a possibility.
I mean, I definitely think that the partners should be, I think that super should be shared, to the extent that women are taking time out of the workforce to, and not accumulating super when they're doing that. I think that should, I don't think the husband should be like accumulating super that's just going to them. I think if they are accumulating super, it should be flowing to both of them because it's a shared project, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the workplace fertility metrics, I had a little, because I'm a bit like worried about technocratic surveillance. But I thought, oh, it could be another way where, it becomes like a token. Have you got enough children to be in this workplace, or too many, or, you'll be taxing your carbon
No,
footprint.
it wouldn't so much be about how much children have you had. It would be about, let's say, how many, how there's this workplace, like the Gender Equality Index, which is sort of reporting on how many women in your senior positions and so on. This would be kind of a pronatalist version of that, which would be like, how many maternity leaves have you allocated in your granted in to your employees, given the number of women in your organization, that sort of thing. So
okay, so it's the employer in a sense being surveilled,
because there's some like employers. So I don't know if you've heard of the semiconductor manufacturing facility in Taiwan. So this is
I haven't.
It's this facility, like a large kind of a conglomerate of companies, I think, that produce a lot of the silicon and chips for basically all the information tech that we use today. And they have a much higher fertility rate than like the rest of the country in Taiwan. Their fertility rate is 3 or something, like really, really high. And for workers that are in that organization and in that sector. And that's really interesting because it's, I think it's above what you would expect for that type of work. And they have various kind of policies like on-site daycare and flexible work and so on. And so really supportive of it. And so I think that's just interesting to understand that fertility isn't just flat across the population. There are higher parts and lower parts, and we want to try to kind of identify those and see what is unique about those sort of workplaces or industries that support people having families.
That is really interesting, especially when it's so much of an outlier to the rest of the place.
Yeah.
All right, I'm conscious we've been at this for a couple of hours. Thank you so much, Andrew. It's really, really interesting. I'd like to promote your book when it comes out, but I'll link to the Quillette article and the little video, which I only discovered this morning.
I only saw they made that.
And anything else that you've written or published on this topic, I'm happy I'll link it. And thank you so much.
I'll send you a link to the website. So I've created, so the Pronatalism Australia is I've registered it as a not-for-profit, and I'm trying to get the website going at the moment. And then the book is, barring some publisher changing the name, it's going to be called Pronatalism for the 22nd Century. Because I think this is when things are going to be, that's when we're going to feel it. And
wonderful. Well, I'll put it here. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Veritas podcast. If you'd like to support the show, please subscribe to my Substack, also called Veritas. You can find most of the ideas or the references spoken about in the show linked in the show notes. See you next time.